Diablo 4 is full of bosses, but some of the best bosses are featured in its campaign. I've just finished Diablo 4's story, and here are my top 5 bosses from Diablo 4's campaign. Number 5 is Lilith's Lament from Act 1. This was a boss that I fought in the beta, so I knew what was coming when I got to it in the story, but it was the first boss fight that made me actually appreciate what Diablo 4 does with its bosses in terms of how it incorporates the environment and story into its boss fights. With the assistance of Vigo and sort of having to know what to do in terms of getting inside the bubble at the right time and having that environment incorporate into the boss fight was really fun and engaging. It was also a boss that somewhat challenged me at first, but I beat it first time with no worries. But part of that might have been because I already did it in the beta, so I knew what was coming, but it was still a really fun boss fight nonetheless. Number 4 on my list is Astaroth from Act 2. This was the first boss fight that I went, oh, this is the potential that Diablo has, this is why it's so cool, is because some of these big bosses are just like really out there. This one was the one that made me go, wow. It was also a boss that I had a little bit of trouble with to begin with, but after taking a bit of a break and coming back to it, I did it with relative ease. But it was still a really fun boss fight nonetheless, and just the Astaroth character in general seems really cool to me. The lore behind it and the sort of significance of that boss fight, having it be Donan's son technically in there was a really cool aspect to think about. And the Hound that sort of incorporated with Astaroth, which was a previous boss fight that you kind of did a little bit before this. It was just a fun and engaging boss fight that had a really cool design. Number 3 is Andariel. This was a boss fight that I didn't actually see coming. It sort of just comes out of nowhere in the story, but I'm glad it did because Andariel's design is a really cool thing, and it was just so out there. The way the environment sort of kicked up a storm around you, the way there were different things scattered around the arena that would deal damage and sort of you had to worry about them. There was a lot of things you had to juggle in this boss fight. Her design is really cool. The sort of these chained wings that then turn into like this almost like Iron Spider-Man legs that come out the back. Is just a really cool design. She had some really cool moves that you had to get out the way of, and it was a boss that really felt incorporated into Diablo and really felt like a Diablo boss. I know this is someone that appears in Diablo 2, so for a lot of people this is probably a really cool boss to see come back. And yeah, it was just a really fun boss fight in a spot in the story where stuff is starting to get a bit more serious. There's a bit more at stake, and this was the first sort of indication of that. Number 2 is Elias. Specifically the first time you face him, where you have to fight him 3 or 4 times. This was a boss fight that got gradually harder as you beat him. He'd get more moves, there would be more adds, the arena would change. It was just this gradual sort of difficulty spike that actually felt really satisfying when you eventually beat him the last time. This is probably one of the more mechanically intelligent fights you have to do, just because of how many times you have to face him over and over again. Also the story significance of this boss being Lorath's ex-apprentice, the one that actually summoned Lilith. You learn later on how he gets his immortality and sort of the significance of that. And he was just a really cool villain in general in this story, sort of being at the side of Lilith at all times and having that connection to Lorath. This is someone that we had sort of had a lot of build up for when it comes to fighting him, and fighting him at the end of Act 3 here multiple times was like, oh, okay, this is actually someone we really have to worry about here because of that immortality. And then eventually in a later act you do kill him and have that sort of satisfaction of we've destroyed a pretty serious villain here. This is why Elias is number 2 on this list as opposed to some of the other really cool designed bosses, is because of the story significance of him. And it was also just a really fun boss fight to sort of gradually go through it, and that's why Elias is number 2 on this list. Before I get to number 1, I just want to really quickly mention all the bosses in Act 6, because fighting through the city, fighting through hell, a lot of these high tier demon, lesser evil type bosses were really cool. I wasn't expecting this many bosses to be in Act 6 alone, and each of them felt challenging in their own way. Some of them had really cool designs, and I just enjoyed the arena that they were in, and it gave the last act of this story some real weight. It actually felt like we were fighting our way to hell, getting through all these much larger demons, much harder bosses, to eventually get to number 1 on my list, Lilith. It's pretty hard not to put Lilith at number 1 because this is exactly who we've been chasing throughout the entire campaign, and to eventually come to the end of the story to fight Lilith, the daughter of hatred, the creator of Sanctuary. There's some really cool story moments that happen in this last act attack that sort of build up Lilith even more. There's a cutscene with Inarius and Lilith, and that just sort of that build up to Lilith as the final boss makes this one number one on my list, because it is just so much fun, and it was just a cool design. There was just so much going on. The way the arena sort of set up and gradually got smaller as you went through the boss fight. The way she has two phases, I guess you can call it, where you fight the creator of Sanctuary version of her and then the daughter of Hatred version of her. The amount of ants that come into this sort of making it way more challenging. A lot of her move sets were really cool and just way cooler than any of the previous bosses in the game. She's one that actually made me have to really think about where I was placed on the arena. Some of her moves were so damaging that you actually had to pay attention and think about it. Rather than mashing buttons hoping to do as much damage as possible, you actually had to think about your placement, think about your health a lot more, think about how much potions you had left, think about what moves you needed to get out of the way from, when you had to attack, when you could do the most damage, and when you actually had to take a step back and go, actually, I'm going to run around the arena a bit and wait so I can do a lot more damage or get out of the way this really heavy attack. In terms of the story, she is definitely the best boss in my opinion. Story significance, the design, the arena, everything about it just oozes Diablo, and what makes Diablo so engaging, so much fun. And yeah, I just really love this boss fight. I think having so much build up really helped me enjoy this boss fight more. The fact that it was in hell, the fact that it was in the Cathedral of Hatred, the fact that she was there to take out her father Mephisto and you were there to stop both. That's why this boss fight is number one on my list. Obviously, Diablo 4's story is full of great bosses, but this was just my top 5 as well as some special mentions in Act 6. Let me know in the comments down below who you thought was the best boss in Diablo's story, maybe who you found the most challenging as well. And if you liked this video, please leave it a like, subscribe for more Diablo 4 content, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.